In this video, I'm going to discuss how non-experts should think about experts, such as medical doctors, scientific researchers, public health authorities, and other people who are often called professionals who may have formal degrees and licenses, how we should approach what they recommend or what they try to order us to do. Probably many people who are listening to this have or know of someone who've had this kind of issue, such as perhaps a diagnosis or recommendation from a family doctor that they developed doubts about, or in fact ended up perhaps getting a second opinion and changing their mind. This is something that has been frequently come up in the coronavirus crisis over the last several months, where top authorities have actually made contradictory statements several times, and where it's common to see memes, graphics, slogans on social media accounts, on Facebook and other social media companies, extolling the virtues of experts, of professionals, and urging people to just do what they're told and not question what they're being told, let alone make a decision not to do so. I'm going to start by going over just one of the many examples of the frequent failures of modern medicine. This is a list of 35 drugs approved by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, that have been pulled from the market due to safety and effectiveness concerns. So they include Accutane, acne medicine. It's too many for me to go over, but I just want to scroll through them, showing some of the advertisements for them as well from this website, which was done in 2014. Some of these affected very large numbers of people, 2,110 deaths, for example, here with Darvon, that were reported. Many times these things don't go reported. DES, Duract, Ergemasol, Hismenal. This is an antihistamine that caused various problems. Lotronex. I'll just quickly go through these down to the one that I know the most about, which was relatively recent, which was pulled in 2003. And here we go. They're pushing Quaaludes, which were very widely consumed at one point. Let's go a little bit further. As you can see, there's quite a number. Tresol and Vioxx. Vioxx, or rofecoxib, that's its sort of technical name, was produced by Merck, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, one of the most prestigious, and was marketed from May 1999 with FDA approval to 2003, so not so long ago, 5.3 years, and probably caused many, many deaths from heart attacks and strokes. Probably the number from my research into it is probably substantially higher than 27,000. It was very heavily promoted using fancy promotional methods. This is an infamous ad with Dorothy Hamill, the Olympic figure skate gold medalist, who played a big role in promoting this. But it was FDA approved. There was a lot of stonewalling by Merck, and it was eventually withdrawn after strong evidence surfaced that it was substantially increasing the incidence of heart attacks, strokes, cardiac deaths. So it's worth understanding in this particular case, and I'm not going to go into discussion of the many other examples of problems with modern medicine as well as historical medicine. It's important to understand that the FDA, contrary to what many people think, approves these drugs with generally a few thousand, maybe 2,000, 3,000 people given the drug. Most of those people are given the drug for about 6 months, and a handful, maybe a few hundred, will be given it for, say, 18 months. You actually can't really rule out effectively serious and lethal side effects at a level below probably 1 in 1,000 with such small numbers of people being tested with it. So you really would need to be tens of thousands of people given the drug, not thousands, maybe even 100,000, to really nail down these rare side effects, which can be fatal, as is probably the case with Vioxx. Secondly, most of the time, most of those people are only given the drug for 6 months. And the significance of that is that many of these drugs, like Vioxx was a painkiller mostly targeted at older people with arthritis. And Vioxx was taken continuously by people. If you have arthritis, you have various kinds of chronic pain. That's the target market. And those people take it for much more than 6 months. So there's a good chance that the negative effects of Vioxx were cumulative, slowly wearing down this complicated blood coagulation system. What that means is these 6-month tests, not only are the statistics low with only a few thousand people taking the drugs, so their ability to detect a dangerous or lethal side effect at a 1 in 1,000 level if you take the drug for 6 months is limited. 1 in 1,000 is much higher than your risk of dying in a car accident, for example. And it's actually comparable to the risk that is now being reported, the infection fatality rate of the COVID-19 coronavirus, which is officially the CDC, I think the last number they put out was 0.26%. Now take those numbers with great caution. They're kind of meaningless because it varies enormously with age, pre-existing conditions, and very likely other factors we know nothing about or really haven't identified or measured adequately. Nonetheless, the point is that the FDA approval process can let through drugs that are actually quite dangerous, particularly if they have a longer-term cumulative effect that doesn't show up in 6 months, their ability to find something. Potentially, some of these drugs could, if you took them long enough, be fatal to everyone eventually. Again, the tests can't really tell. So it's important to understand that these tests are more sensible, these 6-month periods are more sensible for drugs like antibiotics, which you take once for an emergency. You get bacterial pneumonia, you take antibiotics for 6 weeks, for a few months, and you get over it, and you never take the drug again. And in that case, testing the drug over a 6-month period of time would probably rule out most dangerous effects. Not all. There's no guarantees with anything. Nonetheless, many modern drugs, which are often called blockbuster drugs, are really aimed at chronic illnesses, at things like arthritis pain, and they're actually being approved to be given to people not for 6 months even, but permanently until they die, which means a lot of this testing process is not likely to detect longer-term cumulative negative effects. So this is what the experts do. And this is Merck. There was extensive research by top medical doctors and scientific researchers in places like Stanford and other major universities, as well as directly employed by Merck. They did extensive testing by the standards of the FDA. It went through the supposedly rigorous FDA approval process. It was approved. It turned out to be quite dangerous. So these are not some fly-by-night little company out in the middle of nowhere that somehow got this thing through. This was one of the top pharmaceutical companies in the world, and a company which up until this time had a very good reputation. We can quibble, maybe that wasn't deserved, but the point is this is not some flaky fly-by-night operation as we normally think of it. So what does this tell us? Well, I can't and don't have time in this video to cover the many other examples in history of medical doctors, not just as individuals, but as large groups, entire medical associations, making very bad recommendations to people, things that we now consider not to be true. The many cases where doctors have gone overboard with a new drug or new medical procedure and injured or killed many people before they realized that this new drug or medical procedure was actually dangerous in ways that weren't obvious at first. In some cases, they disregarded clear evidence that it was dangerous from the very beginning. So experts make serious mistakes. This is important to keep in mind. Medical doctors, scientific researchers in the uncertain world of medicine, health, and biology make very serious mistakes, mistakes that kill large numbers of people on occasion. The fact that they have a Ph.D. or an M.D. from Harvard or MIT or Stanford University or top institutions, these are undoubtedly very smart people, does not mean they're not going to make a very serious mistake. It happens, and it's happened many times. That's very important to keep in mind. Do these doctors know more than you do about what they're doing? In most cases, yes, probably they do. There are obviously exceptions. It is not unheard of for people who themselves or family members have a serious health problem or concern to actually become more expert over time than the medical doctors in their particular area of their illness or their problem that they're having. So keep that in mind as well. But the important point is we don't have to speculate or make theoretical arguments. We know from the history of medicine, the history of science, that top medical doctors, not just as individuals, but institutionally, companies, the FDA, the entire medical community has on numerous occasions made very serious mistakes and exhibited a lack of critical judgment and excessive enthusiasm for various drugs, various medical treatments, types of surgery. It has happened. Here we have maybe 35 cases of it. This is a small segment of the total number of examples that could be cited. So particularly in an environment of mass panic, of hysteria, of a big rush, Operation Warp Speed to develop a vaccine far faster than it's ever been successfully done before. This is precisely the environment in which experts are likely to make misjudgments. And Vioxx took years to be developed and approved. It was not a mad rush, as far as we know, to develop this drug, and yet it had very serious problems. The lawsuits and other investigations indicated that the scientists disregarded theoretical and other empirical data indicating that it was likely to cause an increase in heart attacks, to interfere with the operation of the blood coagulation system, and might increase the risk of heart attacks and strokes. So they disregarded information that they presumably didn't want to hear. They got carried away, is the most generous interpretation of what happened. It's very possible they did get carried away. Therefore, it is appropriate to view with skepticism, to get a second opinion for a medical judgment, and to be cautious not just about individual doctors, your family doctor, even ones you trust and have a good history with, but to be wary of large groups of doctors, large groups of scientific researchers, the entire medical system. It has actually been wrong about many things many times over the years. There's a sort of inability to learn from that experience. There are many examples of the medical system being very confident about something, ridiculing people who raise questions, and turning out ultimately to have been wrong. But they don't seem to really learn from that. They continue to exhibit this overconfidence generation after generation. To some degree, they've probably been taught that, well, yeah, those primitive backward doctors in the 19th century or 20 years ago even, yeah, they didn't know, but now we know better, and we aren't going to make that mistake again. In fact, people do. So how should you approach statements by the experts, by the World Health Organization, or Centers for Disease Control, or self-appointed experts like Bill Gates or YouTube? The answer is clear, with significant skepticism. That's not disrespectful. It's just recognizing people make mistakes, not just individually, but collectively. That we seek a second opinion, that we want to know whether the things we're being told make logical sense, whether the data really supports them. That's prudent judgment. The internet has generally, prior to the current wave of censorship, made it easier for people to check these claims and find contrary evidence. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. That does not mean that one should dismiss experts or one shouldn't go to them. Now, when my car breaks down or I have problems with it, I don't know very much about cars, so of course I go to a mechanic. But I don't go in and say, I'm sure this mechanic knows everything about cars, he wouldn't lie to me, he wouldn't make a mistake. I've had several experiences with mechanics where, for example, they came back and said, you need to replace this, it's going to be very expensive, it'll cost thousands of dollars. And I didn't know that much about what they were talking about, but I said, I probably should get a second opinion here. So I went to another mechanic, and they're like, oh, there's nothing wrong. Or in one case, the mechanic looked at it and said, I can replace this part here for $50 and your problem goes away, which is exactly what he did. We all realize that happens with mechanics. Some mechanics are very honest, they're very competent. Even the very honest, very competent mechanics will occasionally make a mistake. We also know there are con men out there who take advantage of our lack of expertise in cars or other subjects. That's part of life. For some reason, the notion that that happens with doctors and scientists is somehow, oh, that couldn't happen. Well, I know it does happen, and probably if you've had a lot of experience with doctors or you know people, you know of cases where the doctors seem to have either not known what they were talking about or perhaps they were lying to run up a bill to make more money in some way. So in conclusion, as with car mechanics, unless you're really a car expert yourself, of course we should go to the experts. Of course we should listen to them. But we should also approach them with certain skepticism. We should try to verify that what they are telling us is true. They ought to be able to explain to us clearly why what they say is true. They ought to be able to show us research studies. They ought to be able to defend those research studies. They ought to be able to explain criticisms that people raise without using ad hominem arguments, without calling people wingnuts, without calling people anti-vaccine or various terms that get thrown around. They should just be able to say, well, if you look at this over here, this explains that. And on careful examination, those explanations should hold up. As with Vioxx, sometimes they simply don't under close scrutiny. That's how we should approach experts. It's not disrespectful and it's not arrogant, and it is not a statement that you should ignore experts or not talk to them. That's not the issue. The issue is history has demonstrated many, many times up to the present day that experts, both individually and collectively, can be very wrong. In fact, sometimes they can be wrong in ways that are truly remarkable. It's very difficult to understand how they managed to convince themselves that something was true. From the wisdom of years later, we can look back and see, wow, they just got really carried away. They got into a groupthink or some kind of mass hysteria or panic, and they misjudged the situation, and perhaps their egos got involved. This clearly happens. It's happened many times, and that's why we should approach experts with respect, but also with caution. This concludes this video presentation. If you like this video, please click like. Please click subscribe and the notification bell if you would like to receive more content from us. You can avoid internet censorship by subscribing directly to our RSS news feed. Please consider sharing the link by email and on your website or blog, in addition to liking, upvoting, or sharing on increasingly censored, advertising beholden, big company social media. We have encountered such censorship. Mathematical software is developing algorithms and software to automate data analysis, reducing the risks of costly errors and increasing the predictive power of the results. You can support our work financially by subscribing on our Patreon page, https://www.patreon.com/mathsoft, or scanning the QR code in the lower right corner.